Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I would like to welcome you to our monthly community call as we prepare for our pilgrimage to Chartres this July upcoming. We want to change the format a bit for this call. We'll be going for only an hour, and it'll be shaped more as a dialogue. I just wanted to say, for those of you who are new to the Chartres community, this is our oldest continuous course every year since 2006. We'll be marking our 13th anniversary in Chartres. And every year for 13 years, it's the largest class in the Wisdom School of Ubiquity University. And we founded it in 2006 to demarcate the 1000th anniversary of the founding of the original Chartres Academy in 1006 by Fulbert and the Chartrian masters. And every year we go back to that place to immerse ourselves in the sacred feminine and in the Druidic and Celtic substrate that is informing that sacred site to the present day. We'll start, as we always do, with an invocation. And I'd like to invite you, Karen, to invoke our presence here on this call.
Thank you, Jim. So if we could all turn our hearts and thoughts to Chartres, to the holy hill where the cathedral stands and where a long history has taken place of worship and spiritual connection through the earth ley lines and through the work of human beings. And at this time of the Vernal Equinox, having just passed, as the light is now overtaken the darkness for the next 6 months in the Northern Hemisphere, let us think of the Black Madonna as she dwells in the crypt and her presence emerging from the depths at this time as the light increases. And in the same way that the flowers rise up in the spring, the blossoms make the air fragrant, and still there's a crystalline night sky. We see reflections of light everywhere. Nature rays forth the glory of the light that shines in the day through the sun, through the plant kingdom, and through human hearts, and shines in the night through the reflection of the moon and the glistening stars. And if we can attune our hearts to the radiance of this light that shines both in the physical world and meets our eyes, and shines through a spiritual essence and illumines our hearts and minds, we turn to the divine wisdom that flows through the divine feminine principle in the world to which Chartres is dedicated, and open ourselves to receive the wisdom, the light, both radiant in the sun and the moon, and through the hearts of those we meet. We send our gratitude and look forward to the time when we can come together in Chartres as a community, honoring the light and the divine feminine as she appears in Chartres as the Black Madonna and as Mary. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. And as Karen invoked our time together, she was recalling deep history of the Celts and the Druids coming to Chartres. And it's as we celebrate the Vernal Equinox, this was one of their holiest of holy days. Because when they swept out of Central Europe into Western Europe about 3,500 years ago, about 1500 BC, they came all through what is now the Benelux countries, Germany, France, down into Spain, up into Britain. And the place that they came to in Chartres, they considered to be the most sacred site in all of Europe. And they discovered in Chartres a granite promontory underneath which was limestone, and between the two was a grotto. And they immediately sensed, as the Druids were very sophisticated in doing, the peculiar quality of a feminine divinity. And it was a very specific feminine divinity. It was a divinity of a virgin expecting to be impregnated to give birth. And every year they would consecrate this feminine energy. They fashioned a Black Madonna, as Karen indicated. And in the Fall Equinox each year, they would take the Black Madonna down into the crypt, the grotto. And then on the Spring Equinox, they would bring her out and put her on top of the granite promontory. And at least once, if not twice a year, as far as we know, every Celt was required to come to Chartres. And this was known as their Vatican. You know, the word Vatican that they use in the Roman Catholic tradition is actually a Celtic word, meaning the seat. Chartres was the seat of the Celts, of the Druids. And so as we consecrate the Vernal Equinox, as we're doing today, we want to talk about light and darkness and the interplay of those opposites. And we're delighted today to be able to welcome one of our core faculty, Banafsheh Sayyad, who is Persian by origin. And you know, the Persians have maintained the Vernal Equinox as the beginning of the year, something that we in the West have lost, which we'll get into in a few minutes. But Banafsheh, I want to welcome you to kick off our discussion, and then Jane and various others. And those of you who are participants on the call, I want you to be thinking about light and dark. I want you to be thinking about the Vernal Equinox, because I'm going to be calling on various of you in the course of the discussion so that we can interact together synergistically and interactively in the course of the next an hour. Then we'll close it off and meet again in 1 month's time. But Banafsheh, welcome.
Thank you. Spring greetings to everyone from a beautiful, rainy Southern California. I feel the perpetually expectant virgin Jim was talking about, that the Druids brought out on Spring Equinox, represents the earth herself, who begins her journey to womanhood as a virgin in spring. I'd like to begin my short discourse with a journey into the dance of light and dark in the Persian tradition, as exemplified in the relationship of the earth to the sun. The equinoxes and the solstices are very important times of the year in the Persian tradition, preserved from about 3,000 years ago. They're marked by celebration, ritual, and great festivity. In the Northern Hemisphere, the Fall Equinox, or Mehregan, which is a balance between light and dark, marks the time when the dark begins to expand. And as it reaches its pinnacle by the winter solstice, Yalda, a speck of light starts to grow within the dark, which is considered the birth of the sun, the birth of Mithra, later adopted as the birth of Jesus, whose title Christ, Christus, Greek for the anointed, comes from the Persian word khorshid, meaning the sun. The days start to get longer, and by spring equinox, Nowruz, the light and dark are equal again, similar to the fall equinox, with the difference that now the light begins to expand, reaching its pinnacle by the summer solstice, Tirgan, when the sun reaches its highest position in the sky. And so after the summer solstice, the expansion of dark begins and the night starts to get longer, until we come to the fall equinox again, when the light and the dark reach balance and the cycle continues, the dance continues. And as you know, all of this is reversed in the southern hemisphere. So let me now focus on the spring equinox, which in the Persian tradition, as Jim was saying, begins the year. We refer to this day as Nowruz, which literally means a new day. Just like the Christmas tree is emblematic of Christmas in the Christian tradition, in the Persian tradition, we have 7 items that we set up on display which represent Nowruz, or a new day. 3 of these items represent the material world, 3 the spiritual world, and the 7th connects the 2 worlds. For representing the material world, we have stone, grass, usually a dish of sprouting wheat, and egg, representing the mineral, vegetable, and animal domains. The 3 items that represent the spiritual world are a lit candle as the symbol of light, and the creative, placed in front of the second item, which is a mirror, representing the receptive, the reflection of the creative, or creativity in potential. The third item in this category is a red fish in a bowl of water. The red fish is a symbol of fire and also of life. And the water is the infinite. So the fish in water represents both eternal aliveness, eternal life, and the creative in action. The symbol that brings the 2 worlds together is a chalice of wine, which represents the human being. The chalice is the body and the wine spirit. It's the human being who bridges the physical and the spiritual worlds. Now, these days, we see many variations of this display. People add more items and do a fabulous spread. But these 7 are always present. And just as a note, for many Muslims who celebrate Nowruz, the new day, they place vinegar instead of wine. I'm going to share my screen so you can see just one example of this spread. There have been many variations of this, but this one is the one that my mother set up. So yes. So anyway, it's very important to note that Nowruz and the other Persian rites that I mentioned around the fall equinox and the solstices are not religious. They're not human-based and tribally oriented like other religious systems, namely the Abrahamic, but they're an attunement to nature and based in astronomy. I feel it's important that we begin our year when nature renews herself so that we feel harmonized with the rest of nature and with the universe. Beginning the year as we do in the West in the middle of the winter is out of sync with nature, and it magnifies our lost connection with nature. So I would like to ask Jim to talk to us about how that changed in the Western calendar and when it changed.
Well, first of all, thank you, Banafsheh. That was a beautiful spread that your mother did. Presumably that's from her house in the last couple of days. You know, it's actually quite strange that we start our year on January 1. because universally in antiquity, east and west, north and south, it was always demarcated on the vernal equinox, because that's what makes sense. That's when spring starts. So why did we ever come to start our calendars in January? Well, it was started by the Romans, and it was codified by none other than Julius Caesar, who created what they call the Julian Calendar. And the origin of the change came about in the following way. In the Roman Republic, the generals were sent out each spring, and they served for 1 year. And as the Roman Empire began to expand, it was taking them longer and longer to get to the frontier. So they began a practice of sending out their generals 3 months early, and they began to orient their politics and their own, annual rhythms by when the generals were sent out to the frontiers. And then in Julius Caesar's day, when he created the Julian calendar in 45 BC, 1 year before he was assassinated. He officially made January 1 the beginning of the Roman calendar. It's worth noting that it became associated with such extraordinary festivity and drunkenness that the church, one of the popes I think it was in the late 6th century AD, at the Council of Tours in France, decided to disband January 1 as the prevailing time to demarcate the year, in order to dilute the feverish alcohol consumption that began to be associated by that day. What else are you going to do in the dead of winter, right? And during the medieval period, different countries and even different cities had different dates for the starting of the new year. And it was in fact considered a little problematic spiritually to be over concerned with temporal dates, because everybody in the Catholic tradition could hardly wait to die so they could go to heaven. And it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that they began codifying once again, particularly with the Gregorian calendar, January 1 as the start date for the year. But it's a little like daylight savings time. Actually doesn't make sense. It's an artificial construct done for, in this case, military reasons that have somehow got ingrained in the Western tradition. And I long for the day when we would move our beginning of the new year to the Vernal Equinox and celebrate the rite of spring, as Persians have done forever and much of the rest of the world, in alignment with our Mother Earth. But is there anything else, Banafsheh, you'd like to say before we turn it over to some of the others?
No, I think that's it. I would like to hear from others, and then in the end, I'll talk about what I'm going to be doing during our intensive.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's talk more about this subject first, and then we'll turn to that later, if that's okay.
Sure.
From others.
Well, let me say the way I'd like to proceed. I'd love Karen, who's very learned in these matters, to share her reflections on light and dark. Maybe Jane, you'd like to add something. And then I was looking at the participant list, and I would love if Kaylin, maybe Dawn, Frederica, and Paul, some of my favorite Chartres co-pilgrims, Bonnie.
And Mariam, I would like to talk as well, Mariam.
And Mariam, yes. So you guys think about what you want to say about light and dark. But first, let's hear from Karen and Jade.
Thank you, Banafsheh, and thank you, Jim. Well, I have a few things to say. It could go in a number of directions, but so I am of the orientation to try and live into what is. And so what is that in our Western world, January 1st is celebrated as the beginning of the new year. And we also have the Hebrew New Year, which begins right near the autumnal equinox in September with Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And so there are these variations as to whether one is working with a lunar calendar or a solar calendar. And one of the things that I think is beautiful about the year beginning in January is because we have the winter solstice on December 21st, 22nd, varies year to year. And that's the time of the greatest darkness, when darkness is really pervading the life cycle in the Northern Hemisphere. And it takes about 3 to 5 days for the human eye to be able to identify by looking at shadows that the light is actually beginning to increase. That's when, if there aren't telescopes and things like that, we are able to identify that we've passed a turning point and light is beginning to increase. And so that's why December 24th and 25th has been chosen as the celebrated birth dates for 6 different prophets in 6 different spiritual traditions. It's not only in Christianity that the birth of Jesus is celebrated then, but actually Mithra's birthday is celebrated on the night of the 24th leading into the 25th of December, and Krishna in Hinduism, and Dionysus in the Greek tradition, and Horus in the Egyptian tradition, and Tammuz in the Chaldean tradition. And so there was a real focus on the birth of light at the turning point after the winter solstice. And so there's something important about that. And there's also something very important in the vernal equinox when light conquers the darkness, when it becomes greater than the darkness. And one way that this is expressed astronomically is that the moon governs our lives during the 6 months from the autumnal equinox around through winter and up to the vernal equinox, and that the sun reigns from the vernal equinox all the way through summer and up to the autumnal equinox. And so I happen to be a person who loves the sunlight, and so my favorite time of year is spring and summer, but nevertheless, I try to find something to connect onto with this winter solstice as the beginning of a year. And actually, something is beginning in the interior of the earth. There's something working very hard internally to prepare the seeds to break through. And there are considerations in terms of how one orients oneself. For example, when one lives on the equator, where my son-in-law lived up until a few years ago, and there are no seasons, and it all feels the same, that's also a very, very different experience for the human being on the earth. And so, and in Persia, there is a sense of seasons, and so the tradition there, I think wherever we live, there's an orientation to what nature presents to us from that vantage point. And so I think I'll leave it at that and welcome whoever's next that you would like to invite, Jim.
Great. You know, and that's a great point that you're making, Karen, around the equator. And then, of course, the southern hemisphere is completely the reverse.
Exactly.
And so where we are determines what we believe. and how we orient ourselves to the great constellations and changes of the sun and the earth and the moon and so forth. So thank you for that. And I also appreciate you pointing out that there is a logic to January 1. And the December 24, 25th, the entire 365 days is important. Each day has its own power. So that's important. By the way, I just want to noted that Michael Rice is on the call. Michael, I didn't take note of you. I thought you'd be on the faculty list, but welcome. Maybe we can hear from you in a few minutes. But Jane, why don't you say a few words, and then I'd like Mariam and Kaylin and Bonnie to think about something that they might want to say.
Okay. Hi everybody. It's pretty heavy rain here in Australia, so I'm just going to talk a little bit loud. We just suddenly have a new TV series here. It's called Nightfall, and it's all about the Templars, and it's a bit like these shows called the Vikings, where there's lots of power with the Pope, and the Templars are meant to support the Pope, but the Pope becomes corrupt. But the whole story, it's every Thursday night, the whole story is about finding the sacred chalice. And I was interested to bring this point up because it's in the mass consciousness here that who are these Templars and what are all these wars being fought about? And it was one of the seventh item that Banafsheh was talking about. The chalice was the sacred right that governs and dominates all the other ones. So I just found it interesting that the people who are portraying the Templars and the wars and the power of that time have based their whole philosophy on seeking this mystical vessel called the chalice. So it made me think of Banafsheh's ritual, which I'd never really thought about how important that was, whether it represents the blood of Christ. And yeah, so I've been watching that every Thursday night and sort of getting addicted to it because I'd never really looked deeply into the costumes that they wore and the ceremonies that they did. So it's a bit, I don't know where you are, you watch shows like the Vikings, and they're really popular and quite like addictive. So I've really been enjoying that show. It's called Nightfall. Yeah, and the other thing is, it's interesting, I was wondering, like, if 2,000 years ago, if we're living on the north and have awareness that their new year would, when their light is rising, would they have awareness that the people in the southern hemisphere, like Australia, were having an opposite type of light effect, that would be their winter? So my thought there is that because of this globalism and the internet and satellite technology, this apparent duality of people thinking that there's only light here, but in the southern hemisphere there's no light. I'm thinking that thanks to this technology, we've come to a time now where we recognize that there is a constant interplay of the light and the dark, and that really there is no separation. Yeah, okay, that's all I just wanted to say. And I'm really enjoying this discussion on the light and dark. It's a really great time to reflect upon it all. So thank you.
Jane. I mean, that's a profound point that you're making, that while we're celebrating spring, the opposite is taking place in the southern hemisphere. Yes. So we're always in the Tao. We're always in the yin and the yang. Whatever time we're celebrating, it's the opposite if you go south of the equator. And that's really good, everyone to hold that have grown up essentially in the northern hemisphere. We're just one half of the golden pie.
So perpetual dance of the light and dark.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Michael, what would be your comment on this before we turn to the students?
That's a really. I'm just listening and absorbing the different viewpoints and just getting a sense of it myself. A few points came to me. One was a realization some years ago that in space, whatever space is, that's still open. But in space, we perceive it, and certainly it's depicted as pure darkness, except, of course, when some object is there that receives light. So that we have this perception, as I say, that space is dark, but it's not. It's completely filled with light. But we can only perceive it when it hits an object. You know? And
well said.
And that's amazing. And it's like one of those little meme photographs I saw of a shadow of a candle. And the candle was lit. So you see the shape of the candle plus the little wick. But of course, the light of the candle makes no shadow. So they're just two little evocative thoughts. You know, that it looks like the candle is not in fact lit, but of course it is. Because why would light create a shadow? In this sense, you know? So they're just two playful thoughts to as a contribution.
As only an Irishman could do it. Well done. Well done. We should also remember St. Patrick's Day just passed.
Yeah, but I have some strong thoughts about that, you know. We're talking about a Columbus type energy, you know, genocidal, religious destruction of a pre-existing culture that was quite advanced.
Yeah.
And whether the character himself was an honorable man within the limits and context of his own beliefs and programming, but the result is that he pretty much came here, destroyed quite an advanced culture.
Yeah.
So personally, I have no resonance with the story, the program, you know.
Yeah. Thank you. Well,
Context.
let's turn to our students. And Mariam, why don't you start off, and then Kaylin and Bonnie, and then we'll have a few others. I'm noting Pila just joined. Welcome, Pila. Well, I hope we can hear from you in a few minutes after you get integrated into the conversation. Kaylin, what would be your comment on these matters?
As you know, mostly I work with the purbas. In theory, the way this works is the purba goes into the ground, and the triangular point on the end is accessing the darkness and trying to receive information, which, if you want to go the Buddhist route that I've been playing with for 50 years, translates into Hinayana and Nirmanakaya. If you're going to go between the Tibetan and the Japanese, it's picking up information in a dorje or a vajra or a thunderbolt in the middle, where we're dealing with some Bogakaya, which is actually light, and Mahayana. And it's going up into the top where the person is, and that's where everything gets transformed into Dharmakaya or Vajrayana, which is the mental part of mental aspects of what you're dealing with. And the way I've found over the years, geometrically, is we're dealing with Fibonacci frequencies. When the purba is down in the earth, the darkness is picking up Fibonacci frequencies. And in the light, you're dealing with Lucas frequencies, which are the higher level frequencies, more spiritual in nature. And we are the middle world of the lower and upper worlds. And that's where those two numbers get blended and allow us to do whatever it is that we want to do, or think whatever it is we want to think, and move everything from our relationship to the earth to a higher calling.
So the purpose of the purba then, Kaylin, is really the transmutation of the dark into the light.
Yes, it's a difference between, there's not really a Tibetan word for transcendent imputation, but basically you're taking a entity and you're moving things from a conceptual imputation where you're theorizing about what it is that you want to manifest in an energetic form. And the purba is the vehicle, literally vehicle, because yana means vehicle, for you to get to a transcendent imputation and turn whatever thoughts and desires you have into concrete things by means of a middle person.
Great, thank you. Anyone who knows about these things and has a purba, this is very important information. Kaylin gave me my purba. I carry it with me almost everywhere. And I hadn't really taken in that transmutational power of the purba in the way you describe it, Kaylin. So thank you for that.
This is Miriam.
Yeah, Miriam, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here. Happy spring, everyone. What would I like to contribute to this discussion? I don't have to contribute anything, but
we would love to hear from you.
I'm Iranian as well, so I know exactly the ritual spread that Banafsheh is talking about, and the 7 elements on the table. They're not always that way, but these are, as she said, the most significant, the most essential are the 7. So that the stone, the grass, the egg, the chalice of wine, the fish, the mirror, and the light. And it was just occurring to me that something's been coming up for me a lot lately is how human-centric we are and just have been for such a long time. Even in this spread that we talk about, the human is just this center, bringing it all together. And obviously, it's important to know our place. Just as it is important to be self-aware on an individual level. But I imagine, like, what if we actually identified with every item that's on that table? What if I were to perceive the fact that my psyche actually contains the stone and the grass and the light and the fish, because a question's come up for me lately, and I think Michael kind of hit on that too, in terms of the wonderful civilizations that are supplanted by our own, is prior to us being so agriculturally involved, what were we doing? What were we doing in the Paleolithic era? We look at the Aborigines of Australia, and they spend a good deal of time in dream time in not being human. So that's really what I would like to add to this, is just this question of, are we really just human? Like, is it possible to contain more on a conscious level? I don't know, but just the question. What were we up to before we were being so absolutely human and deciding that the rhinoceros doesn't need to exist?
Yeah. Well, Mariam, thank you so much. You have hit the nail of the wisdom school and Ubiquity University on the head.
Oh, great.
Because one of the things that we have pioneered, and I think I'm going to ask Pila actually to comment at this point, because one of the things that we've pioneered as a academic institution is the very question that you're asking, that our humanity is comprised of the stone, of the rhinoceros, of the star, of the leaf, of the chalice. Yeah. And I'll never forget the day that Apila, Colorado, and I, in conversation, where Apila said, "Have you ever thought, Jim, of geomythology?" And I thought of Greek mythology. I thought of, Celtic mythology. It had never occurred to me that there was geomythology, that the earth has her stories. And so that conversation birthed in the Wisdom School, at the time Wisdom University, this deep question that you're posing, and it led to a series of courses that we've done, not only in the indigenous mind, as Apila's done for decades now, but also the question of how we engage in meaningful communication with other species, with other entities like stones, because we're the only species that's out of the conversation. And that's one of the reasons why we're so destructive. And one of the reasons, as Michael said, St. Patrick, being a good Christian, led the way for the complete destruction of the pagans. And it's the pagan that we are seeking to bring in to inform not only Christianity, but our our modernity. So I really thank you for that observation. It's foundational to our school. But
can I also say that can I say that I really appreciated what Mariam brought, but also that the 7 items on the spread are pointing to that, to the human being is meant to bring them all together inside themselves and in the world with the reverence and the respect to every single one of those elements.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. I mean, that's what you get in a tradition as old as Persia, which you don't get in Christianity as a new, relatively upstart religion in the overall scheme of things. But when you go back into the ancients, like the Persians, and most specifically, when you go back into the indigenous, the aboriginals, that awareness is conscious. And as Mariam was saying, the dream time is comprised largely of humans experiencing their non-human origins. And that's what guides them into their daytime. It's beautiful. If you read Robert Lawler's work, Voices of the First Day, that comes out very, very clearly. But Apila, why don't you say something to this point?
Sure. Good morning from Maui, Hawaii. And Jim, I was in Costa Rica last week, and I came back completely unaware of the time change. So, and according to the Apila time scale, we were supposed to start the call an hour later. Nevertheless, here we are. So I'm just burning some cedar to bring my heart and mind together. I would also like to mention that Kate Genevieve, a part of the Dream Team, is here with me this morning from England.
Hi, Kate.
So equinox, equilux, light and dark. Chartres is a place where the interaction between the dark and the light, the nexus is the hill itself, the cave, the spring, the black and white rock. And just as the Carnut of ancient day, the Gaul indigenous people, we wisdom people found ourselves delivered to that sacred site, remembering something, and something so powerful that it led to the creation of this wisdom school. And here we are 13 years later, actually 14 if we count the beginning, still embarked in this mystical process. What happened at Chartres, bringing the light and dark together, was the emergence of a model of dream work that exists nowhere else in the world. It doesn't even exist this way fully in indigenous world, but close. It closely to the Chartres model exists in places still, like the Bushmen in South Africa and some of the Australian Aboriginal people. Bringing the worlds together, it isn't random how it's done. And I think this is where our reliance and our deep reverence and appreciation for sacred geometry, sacred mathematics come to play as we try to align ourselves with the forces of nature, even though we now come from this dissociated, separated reality. So the dreams come to us at Chartres, but before there was dream work at our wisdom school, before there were the Gauls, before people were coming to the hill of Chartres with its axis mundi, the connection to the North Star, with wisdom and knowledge and life coming in. Before that time, Paleolithic people were moving into the lands that we now call Western Europe, with the retreat of the ice, moving into the river valleys, and people who we were taught, some of us growing up, were cavemen and ignorant and non-creative people, came into that area. And since the 1950s, with the discovery of the painted caves in the south of France, have realized, and the imminence of those sites has helped us to awaken to the fact that this creative possibility, this striving to align ourselves with the forces of nature, it's been with us since our origins. When I was young, there was a song, "We are stardust, we are golden." And we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. When we go to the painted caves of France, we see the messages there for us. The highest aspirations of our Paleolithic ancestors painted on the caves. So sophisticated are these paintings, making use of the curvature of the rocks, making use of the colored pigments available, with full use of intuition, because the caves are so very, very dark. And to access them in Paleolithic time often meant crawling the equivalent of a half a mile on your belly, knees, and elbows to get to the galleries to paint these beautiful images of what was waiting to meet us within the darkness. Some people then, and even now, were born with the call, with the membrane around their body. And among Celtic people in France and today's United Kingdom, those people are considered to be born with the gift of the second sight. We need that second sight now to remember our inheritance. Our inheritance is our ability to simply be with nature, acknowledging fully our intellectual selves, but joining it through an embodied experience, so that if we want to look at it this way, to see it from this perspective, in accordance with the sacred geometry and mathematics, so inspire creation. When we do this now, coming together from a disconnected history of humanity for thousands of years for some of us, we're coming back to this moment of creation without an active creation story to guide us. For some people, like the Persians, American Indians, we have vestiges of our creation stories. And I think those stories are going to help us to articulate the creation story that's beginning to flare like a clear fire, showing us the creation story that we need for this time. And perhaps this is why Robert Lawler is not with us this year, because it's our job to remember that story of the first day. And the first day is now. In the Hawaiian language, because I'm living here in Hawaii, there's a word called manava, mana, our sacred energy and power. Manava means now, today, right now. The word also means the sacred time. I was having this conversation with my granddaughter, who's fluent in Hawaiian, and she's only 11. And I was talking to her about manava, the sacred time. And she says, "Grandma, that means now." And I'll let it go at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Apila. I'm conscious of the time, but I just want to underscore what you said about it's not only now is the time, but now is the time for the second sight. and the relationship between sight and light. Light is what enables us to see. And so second sight is somehow the deepening of the light.
Jim, can you hear me?
Yeah.
The site is also SITE, because what we're challenged to do is to renew or reignite this site through the sacred sites so that it is embodied and it is place-based.
Good one, good one, good one, good one.
Touché.
Second sight, second sight.
Yes.
You're so good, Apila. So we're want a few more students, and then we'll draw to a close and circle back to Banafsheh before Apila, if you could give us a final benediction. But Bonnie, I noted you were your smiling face. Do you have anything to add? Good to see you.
Nice to see you all, and thank you. Yes, I actually just returned from celebrating the New Year in Bali. It was Nyepi, and it was sort of an extraordinary balance of light and dark. Nyepi is a very religious day for the Balinese, and it's a day meant to be spent in silence and in meditation. They actually turned off all of the electricity, internet, television, phones, everything was shut down for that purpose. So that was really an extraordinary experience to have everything quieted, and all lights were out at 6 p.m. on the island. And then it was a day of light and dark, actually. And to launch it all, there's a beautiful celebration that they do with the parade through the streets, the Ogo Ogo, where they had these giant monster figures that they build in each of the temples around the island. And its purpose is really about looking at the interplay between light and dark, inside and outside, good and evil. And those monsters are carried through the streets of the village with all of the villagers out watching the parade, and they're meant to capture all the evil that has transpired through the year from all of the people. And at the end of the parade, they light them on fire to send the evil away and to clear the space for the new year. And it was quite a beautiful and extraordinary experience to watch and be part of, with all of the locals in the town that I happened to be in to celebrate that. And so I leave you with that thought, and the notion of cleansing at the spring equinox, and being able to start fresh with the season.
Yeah, and they're an example of a celebration in the southern hemisphere.
Yes.
Right. So it's their fall equinox, the rising of the dark. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining this call. There's beautiful Frederica and Paul. So good to see you.
Hello.
What would you have to say about light and dark on this day?
Well, I just like to say we live in New England, so the seasons here are extremely dramatic. So we're seeing the light literally after a dark winter with everything appears to die, and now we're looking at the resurrection where everything is coming back, and we love it. And I'd like to also say, with regards to the transition, being a magical child, I'm drawn to the light side of things. And I recognize not everyone lives in the United States, but at least in my humble opinion, we're experiencing some dark. And yet I'm seeing the light. I'm seeing the light in the well-spoken children from Florida who have somehow figured out that guns do kill people. Seeing the light in the feminine side as the Me Too movement, as the women are finding their voice. And I'm seeing the light in in people being involved in politics, especially women. So from that aspect, with Apila brought back the Stardust time. I'm getting excited. Maybe we're going to see a light come out and have this shadow create light. So that's my view.
Beautiful, thank you. Yeah, there's light in politics. There's light and dark in politics. It's not just the sun and the moon reflected. Thank you, thank you. In a dark time, the light shines. Frederica, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that the situation that we're in now politically can be looked at it sometimes in a positive way, and that I think our new, it's hard for me to say, president has illuminated a lot of shadow that needed to be illuminated. As painful as that is, to see what actually goes on in our freedom country. You know, so it's been very difficult and challenging for so many, I'm sure. But somehow there's a positive side to it. And I asked the Black Madonna Chartres to bless him and his family and his administration and his followers, and illuminate all of our shadows as best as possible. And I love this time because it's able for me to get out into my garden that I love dearly. But I also love the fall and the winter because it's a time to be still. Good in all, right?
Good, good. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. Frederica and Paul are one of the ones the year after year come to Chartres. There's a small group of us, actually quite a large group of us, that just, Chartres is just part of our annual pilgrimage. It's just part of our lives. And so I want to send a special love and appreciation to the two of you. I know we're pushing the top of the hour, but I want to acknowledge Kate. And Kate, if you could just take 30 seconds to say hello, we'll then turn it over to Banafsheh and then have Apila close us out.
Well, we're here working on the dream process, and it just brings back that the wisdom and the mystery is held in the body, and it's the body that balances the light and the dark. I'm sure that this whole call has been a celebration of that. And I just, as I was listening and when I woke up today, there was a dream had by a dreamer a few years ago about the female warrior who balanced the sun and the moon on either side of her. And it seemed so resonant with the towers of Chartres that she didn't even know about. So somehow the depth of the communication and the mystery just happens very naturally through our bodies. And I'm so excited to be doing this work and participating as a collective that is opening to receive that very, very deep communication.
Well, you have no idea how much like a warrior goddess you look with your red band and the tiger in the background. I wish Dan could have gotten a screenshot of all that. So thank you. Kate is one of our bright spirits and an integral part of our dream. And probably next month, over the next month or two, we'll go into more detail about what Kate and Apila and a group of our pilgrims do there in Chartres around dreaming. It's very deep and very unique and very, very powerful. So Banafsheh, why don't you say final comments, and then we'll turn it over to Apila.
Well, what Frederica was saying reminded me of words from Rumi, where he says, light streams towards you from all things, good and bad, thought and passion. The lamps are different, but the light is the same. And what Kate said brings me to what I wanted to talk about in regards to what I will be doing in Chartres, which is starting the days with embodiment, establishing presence in our bodies through sacred movement. And in addition to that, we have a surprise for everyone this year, where we're going to be diving deep into a very amazing, profound Zoroastrian Mithraic tale told through the Sufi lens, in which we will experienced the dance or the battle of light and dark. We will be enacting some concepts from this story in the afternoons, and also exploring the geometric shapes of some of these concepts. So I'm very excited about that for this year. And I hope that the people who are on this call who haven't registered yet will get excited to register and join us for the amazing journey we will have into sacred geometry and the dream work. This story that I'm talking about, which I will not reveal, also has a big component of dreaming. So more to be shared in Chartres and not before. So to finish my discourse, I will say Nowruz Piruz, which means may the new day triumph, may light triumph over darkness. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful. Apila, give us our benediction.
May the rose water of Nowruz, imbibing fragrance and color, and sow the geometry of renewal into our souls, quenching that thirst, that deep longing for co-union. That rose water of life, in Christian terms, the Magdalene, the fragrance of the rose, the dreams of the hill of Chartres. You speak to us, you call to us now through our dreams, through synchronicities, through coincidences, through a dropped word, a sound, a bell in the distance. This is the invitation, the ancestral imperative, the ancestral embrace. May we open to receive her. May those of us within the sound of this transmission, of this connection, of this relationship, respond fully in presence, making the journey to Chartres through prayers, through awareness. May we come, may we unite, may we renew. Ah, Mama, Uanoa, all my relations.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Our next call is on the 12th of April. And if you haven't registered yet for our pilgrimage to Chartres, please do so. And we will see you in a couple of weeks on this same community call. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Aloha.